Yes, thank you, Simone. And well, Thierry, you spoke about maybe not too far future, maybe even what is available even today. But let me come back to for a minute. So you don't have to worry about a history lesson. But for a minute, let me come back some almost 4,000 years back, and yes, Peter, and note the code of Hammurapi. Okay. Now imagine back then that was one of the few sources, or if not the only source of law, of legal information, of legal text, and it was a pillar. Maybe we can say that at that time, one pillar to rule the world. And in fact, it was like that. That was 18th century before Christ. But already back then, this pillar included some basic principles of fair trial. Now, that's the end of the historic lesson. Now, let's come back to these days. And these days, what we as lawyers have to work with is, I would say, tons of law that is produced every year by different jurisdictions, hundreds of EU regulations, directives, decisions, and so on. National legislation, again, hundreds. Case law, thousands maybe. And the law is instantly changing. And how can lawyers cope with such development? And if lawyers, how can ordinary citizens cope with such changes? I honestly don't think that we no longer can work with the vast amount of data. And I'm questioning myself: is the principle of ignorantia juris non excusat still viable? Is it still something we can use as an argument? Well, certainly what I think is quite clear that for some time already, digitalization of law firms and lawyers in general is something that is here. I mean, internet is existing for several decades now, is quite being used for 30 years. Now everything is connected to the internet. We use internet every day, and we use digital tools on an everyday basis. And without these tools, even nowadays, and even for the past 10 years, even maybe more, that's something that lawyers just cannot work with. Without the digital tools, we would not be able to assess, analyze, filter all the amount of legal data that is being available to us. And without this, we would not be able to provide our clients with legal services. And so when speaking about digital transformation of law firms, that's something that is already here. That is something that is already happening for many years. And I would even say that the topic is challenges and opportunities. But I think that digital transformation of law firms is a need. There is no way around that. And if, or without digital transformation or using the digital tools that are available to lawyers more and more extensively, then basically I think that no lawyer can exist anymore. And that's starting with using, of course, ordinary, or nowadays ordinary things like personal computers, internet services, email services, legal information systems, and so on. Without that, we would not be able to work. And so I think digital transformation is something that is really changing even the way lawyers work, and without it, we would not be able to function. So the world is constantly changing. The law is constantly changing. Digital tools, digital world is constantly changing. But perhaps what is not changing, at least not in such a pace, is the principles of legal profession and the fundamental rights. I think that's good. I'm really supportive of that, because maybe that's one of the, again, the pillar that we can hold on to. But when going through a digital transformation of our work, then we still have to see if we are working as lawyers in a way that corresponds to these pillars of our profession, if we work in a way that is corresponding to the fundamental rights. And if I may perhaps just focus on one of the issues and maybe present you with the examples or questions that we pose to ourselves basically on an everyday basis. So then I would be speaking about the principle or about the confidentiality of lawyer-client communication, because that is something that I really feel is at the top of lawyers, or should be at the top of the focus of lawyers. And still, I think even nowadays many lawyers just don't realize how difficult it may be to adhere to this principle in online communication, well, in the digital world in general. It's maybe the distinguished audience here is not the audience I should be addressing this, because you, I'm sure, already are aware of these problems. But even if I start with ordinary email communication, I'd say that still the majority of email communication is not encrypted. Basically, we can consider it a postcard being sent over, not over the postal services, but over the lines. Anyone with good knowledge, technical knowledge, can access this. And now think about how often you communicate with your clients using emails, how often you send them data that are sensitive, that are confidential, and that nobody should really read, like maybe court submissions, maybe some internal correspondence with the client, instructions from the client. And that is something that is, I think, still to be addressed. I still think that there are just too many lawyers who just don't realize that this may be a problem. Then one of the things that actually we nowadays are considering at the IT Law Committee is the fact, can lawyers use cloud services in a way that corresponds to the confidentiality that they should protect? I'm not speaking about let's say the secureness of cloud services, but the fact that many cloud service providers just do not handle the information that's the data that they store is protected by lawyer-client confidentiality. And if requested by law enforcement authorities, they just provide the information. Of course, one can say that the data that is stored, then it can be encrypted. But then it depends on the use of the data, and sometimes it's very hard to work with data that is encrypted. But it's not just about the storage of data. It can be metadata that also can contain some confidential information. But again, it's not only about the storage of data per se, but it's about any cloud services that cloud service providers provide, lawyers use, because it's easy, it's cheap to use, it's easy to implement. But again, the protection of, or the increased need for protection of lawyer-client information is just lacking. So one of the things that we are working on. I could probably continue with more examples, but what has been mentioned here already is grammar checkers, for example, that lawyers use. And many lawyers use them. We are aware of that. But many lawyers maybe just don't realize that the data that the grammar checkers use are being reused for their other purposes. The same is the case of some machine translation services. Is the data that we send to these companies, to these providers, are they sensitive data? Are they confidential data? Do we realize that? That they may be reused, into which extent? There are many questions. And I think that we have still many years to come before we'll be able to say that confidential information is well protected even in the digital world. And I hope, for example, that the proposed Data Act will be one of the pieces of legislation that will really help with this. At the IT Law Committee and CCB in general, we will be working on that. And perhaps to conclude, I hope that AI will be here not just a threat to the protection of lawyer-client communication, but I hope, and hopefully it will be like this, that also AI will be here to improve the protection of confidentiality of lawyer and client communication, but of fundamental rights in general. Thank you.
Thank you very much.